So, something happened recently with one of my kids that stopped me in my tracks. My daughter, who is 7, came home from school one day, and I could see it on her face before she even said a word. Something had clearly happened. One of her good friendships had shifted. She had been left out of something, and it was a whole big to-do. Obviously, for her, it was a huge deal, but for purposes of why we're here today, the details don't really matter to me as much as the feeling. And the feeling that she was feeling was written across her entire body. She was hurt. And my instinct, the one that fires back before I have time to think, was to fix it. To say, hey, what happened? Who did this? Give me a name. I'm going to call a parent. Let me email the teacher. Let me remove this pain from your life as quickly as possible, because that's what I do. That's what I'm programmed to do. I'm a lawyer. I'm an executive. As a business person, I solve problems. Somebody brings me a conflict, and my primary goal is to resolve it. And that's 20 years of my professional conditioning firing all at once. And in this instance, I did not do it. I stopped myself, and instead of solving it, I sat down next to her and I said 4 words. I said, that sounds really hard. And then I didn't say anything else, and I just sat there with her. And what I found that happened in that silence taught me more about parenting than anything I've read in a book. Her shoulders dropped, her breathing slowed down, and she started talking, not to get me to fix it, just to be heard. And over the next 20 minutes or so, she actually worked through it on her own. She didn't need me to solve it for her. She needed me to be present and supportive while she solved it. And my solution, if I had offered it, would have stolen the most important thing that she gained that day: the experience of sitting inside something hard and coming out on the other side. It's that tension, the gap between a parent's instinct to rescue and the child's need to navigate, that brings us here today for this episode. My guest, Courtney Adamo, is a writer, she's a mom, and she's the voice behind one of the most honest Substacks on parenting that I've read. She's here to make the case that if we want kids to grow up as people who can handle hard things as adults, we have to stop shielding them from those hard things as children. So that's why when we come back, Courtney and I will be together making the case for raising kids who can handle hard things. Welcome back to The Case For. I'm your host, Matt Campobasso, and today I'm joined by Courtney Adamo, a writer and a mom whose Substack has become one of the most honest and most thoughtful spaces on parenting that I've come across. Courtney, welcome to The Case For. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you.
So, Courtney, before we build your case, I want anyone listening to get a sense for who you are. So please tell us about yourself, your family, your writing, your Substack, your projects, your passions. What drew you to this particular topic? Because this isn't something you stumbled onto. You've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about how we show up for our kids when things get hard.
Yeah, well, I am a mother of 5 kids. I've been parenting for nearly 21 years now. So we've got kids ranging in age from 21 down to 9. And I've been writing in this sort of parenting and family lifestyle space for the last 20 years. And I'm also the author of 3 books, and I've created and facilitated online courses, one of the most popular of which was one on tweens and teens. So I've sort of spent the last 20 years writing and sharing about family life and connecting with other mothers and parents. And so I've learned a lot.
That's fantastic. I have 3 kids. I have a teen, a 16-year-old son, and a tween. I have a 12-year-old daughter. And just thinking about the challenges that each of them bring, and they're great kids, to be honest. I'm very lucky. But just thinking about the challenges, and especially those challenges in this day and age, I can completely understand why that would be your most popular course, because I think that's an area where parents feel like, okay, I can change diapers, I can set up play dates, I can help with 4th grade math. When you start thinking about things like puberty and relationships and kind of that identity and agency that teenagers and tweens are looking for, that gets very challenging. And it has been for me, at least. So completely could understand why that would be popular with people who you work with.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting for me too. I never read a parenting book until my eldest entered adolescence. So up until that point, I sort of parented intuitively with a lot of love and hard work and kind of just survival instincts, I guess. And then my eldest entered adolescence, and sort of nothing that I kind of relied on up to that point was working anymore. And he was grizzly and grumpy and easily irritated. And the more positive I tried to be, the more negative he became. And I kind of felt like I was fighting this losing battle with him. And that was sort of when I picked up the first parenting book I'd ever read. And it turns out there's actually so much to learn about adolescence and about the changes that happen to our children in that time. And starting with just the changes that happen within their brain. And I feel like the more you learn about that, the more compassionate you can become as a parent, the more patience you can find. And for me, that was incredibly helpful just to kind of understand that it wasn't his fault he was being grumpy and grizzly and rejecting everything I said. I think with the tweens and teens, it's true, there's a lot to learn that can help you be a better, more supportive parent during that time.
Yeah, I think about my son, and the description you just gave is spot on. He went from being this like very sweet, thoughtful, high EQ young man, kid, and he's still those things, but I think coming through puberty and getting into a different social phase of his life, he turned into like a very, very different person. And I think your point that if you continue to try to parent that person the way you parented them when they were 5 or 6 or 7, it's going to be a rough go, because they're almost like a different person altogether. And I think for me, and I know that's not why we're here today, but I think this is a fascinating topic. For me, I almost had to release this idea of who he was in order to kind of rediscover who he's becoming. And there's times where I can see him figuring that out. And so less leading with frustration and like, why is he doing this? All this relationship we had built and all these things. He used to want to spend time with me. And now everything I say, he gives me a look. It's a very humbling experience, and it can be very frustrating, especially if you're a parent who's very present and dialed in and you want to have that connection with your kids, which I think most parents do, but it's challenging. But I completely, it's going through it right now that really hit a nerve. And I would love, if you can recall now or later, the name of the book that you read, because I think I could use a little bit of academia to help me crack this particular nut.
I've read so many books on adolescence. If I were you, I would start with Dr. Dan Siegel's Brainstorm, which just describes the changes that actually happen in the brain. And for me, that just gave me so much compassion for what they're going through that it just like made it sort of, instead of being in a battle with my child, it felt like we were really just riding this kind of bumpy ride together. I think just the more patient you can be to your teenagers, which is so important. I mean, one of the things that actually upset me the most when our eldest entered adolescence, and I don't know, you probably feel the same, is just the way that it impacted the entire family vibe. You watch your other children kind of just observing this. And I didn't want to have fight battles in front of my other kids talking to other parents about it. And I think there's so much value in speaking to other parents, because you really learn how normal these things are, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same, I think it's what we're going to talk about today. The more you understand how normal these big feelings can be for these children, the less kind of reactive you want to be to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the reactivity comes from fear. Because if you're seeing someone you love and who you've raised behaving in ways that you don't understand, you start thinking like, what is this? What's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Is something going on in their lives? And to your point, zooming out and realizing every 15 or 16-year-old boy or girl is going through these sorts of things, then I think that sense of normalcy gives you a confidence of like, okay, other people are dealing with this. And it's not a misery loves company. Like, oh, I'm not the only one. It's okay. This is what's supposed to be happening. And so to your point, kind of arming yourself with knowledge. I think when my 7-year-old, there's not much that a hug and a popsicle or a trip to the park can't solve. And my 16-year-old, I have to go deep in my toolkit. And sometimes I don't have the tools. So I'll definitely check out Brainstorm. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you indulging me on this little detour. I know, again, that's not why we're here. Courtney, I think we can jump right in here. I want to let you make the case that we're here to frame, but as I talked about a little bit ago at the introduction, as a parent and as a lawyer, my entire professional life has been built on solving problems. My focus is I identify the issue, I analyze the options, and then I'm like, hey, here's the answer. Here's what we're going to do. And it has served me well in the courtroom and in the boardroom, but it has been a disaster with my kids. Because when it comes to my kids hurting, whether they're being left out or rejected, if they feel frustrated or confused, my default is I have to solve this. And so I'm starting to realize, and it's only taken me 17 years, that when I swoop in to fix something, I'm robbing them of the ability of figuring out how to solve those things themselves. And so the case today that you're here to make is about resilient adults are not created when we protect our kids from hard things. But I don't want to make your case. At this point, I would love for you to tell our listeners, what is the case you want to make today? And how did you come to believe this is something that we should be talking?
I guess the case I'd like to make is just that, yeah, like you've said it already, but our children grow from hard experiences, from experiencing challenges and failures. And if we shield our kids from having those experiences or unhappy feelings, then they are never going to learn how to navigate them. And I feel like we are all very complex, nuanced human beings. Even as adults, we experience difficult, unhappy emotions. And I think it's understanding that those are very human, and a part of being a human being is having all sorts of different feelings and emotions. And so the best thing we can do for our children is to help them experience those things and learn how to deal with it. I think instead of seeing those as problems we need to resolve, we need to almost see them as actually really great beneficial experiences for them to experience. That it's not something we need to fix. It's something we need to allow them to experience with our support and our love and, being there for them, but we're not trying to take it away from them, as hard as it can be to watch and witness.
Yeah, I think before we get into the exhibits, I used to think about my role as a dad with all three of my kids as kind of like the snowplow. I live outside of Chicago. We have horrible winters, a lot of snow. I think about there's the snowplows that are out there clearing the way so that cars going to school and work or the hospital have clear paths. And I've realized that when I do that, someday I won't be here. I won't either be here on Earth, or I will not be with them when they're off in college or have families of their own. And I don't want them to be unable to navigate in a couple inches of life's snow. And so what I've been trying to do more, especially with my 16-year-old and my 12-year-old, is kind of climb in the proverbial passenger seat with them and say, hey, here's how I might approach this, and let them make decisions and burn their hand on the stove, as the saying goes. And so I think it's a architecture of what's my job as a parent. And so I wish it took me a long time to learn this. And I realize that I probably have, with the benefit of hindsight, deprived my kids of some opportunities and some of life's lessons, because in my experience, feeling that little bit of pain, which again, as parents, we want to protect our kids from everything, but I think we're depriving them of, to your point, the beneficial opportunities to learn lessons tangibly that then they can recall and fall back on as they get out there into the world and start doing things on their own.
Yeah, I'm a really visual person and a visual learner. And one of my favorite learnings I've had was from Dr. Becky Kennedy, who I'm sure everyone in the US is familiar with. Even over here in Australia, we know of her. And I really love the way that she teaches and explains things, because she often uses very visual analogies. And one of the things that she has said on this topic is to sort of envision your child's childhood sort of as your back garden. And in your back garden, there's a whole bunch of different benches. And each of those benches represents a different experience for them to have as they navigate through adolescence.
Okay.
And when your child is sitting, for example, on the bench of, I didn't get asked over to the sleepover and all my other friends got invited, or I didn't do well on this test, or I didn't get chosen for the soccer team, or whatever sad or unhappy experience your child's having, we want to see it as yes, it's so good. They're getting an experience on that bench. And instead of trying to take them off that bench, she says, what we want to do is just envision sitting on that bench with them so that they know that we see them, we understand that it's hard, we're here for them, however we want to support them. And all children, I think, need different types of support depending on the child. But I'm always thinking, oh, this child needs me to sit on the bench with them right now. It's so good to have that visual, I think, as a parent.
Yeah, I think to your point, the instinct, the survival instinct is let's get them off that bench as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And that's just, nothing's being learned. And it's very reactive. And I think that's the imagery of that is something, I'm a very visual learner as well. And
Mm.
I often think and communicate in analogies. And so I'll definitely be taking, I had not heard that one. I do know who Dr. Becky is, but I had not heard that particular one. So I will be taking that one away. So
Yeah.
Courtney, let's jump into Exhibit A. I've got a couple exhibits here. I'm going to prompt you. I want you to kind of explain your perspective on these couple topics that relate to the case that you're making. I think the first one comes down to kind of parental instinct, which is, again, I just mentioned you want to pull your child off that bench. I think naming it, having that rescue reflex as a parent is the first step in managing it. So when any of my kids is hurting, every cell in my body is saying one thing, like, make this stop. And I don't think that's a bad instinct. It comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of being protective. I think it's wired into us from a survival perspective, biologically. As parents, we're supposed to protect our children, and I think that's the job. But I think where we lose the thread on that is that when the instinct becomes the default to every difficult emotion, because it's not about protection at that point, it's interference. And so one of the things that I started to do is when my kids come to me, I want them to help frame for me to the extent that they can. And sometimes when it's very emotional, it's hard, but I'll say, do you want me to listen? Do you want advice, or do you want me to get involved? And the answers are all over the map depending on the situation. And so what I've realized is I'm allowing them to feel those feelings, because previously I was protecting them from their feelings, and those aren't dangerous. Feelings help us develop. And so I guess, have you ever had in your life that reflex? And if so, can you share a time where you kind of caught yourself mid-rescue and pulled back?
Yeah, I think when we try to fix it or we immediately have that reflex to jump in and solve it, it also sends a message to our children that what they're experiencing is big and scary and bad, right?
Mhm.
So that is not the message we want our kids to have. We want our kids to have the message that, yes, this is hard, but you can get through it, right? Like
Yeah.
we can do hard things. Like you're gonna be okay. So that I think is like an important thing to say there. And then to answer your question, I mean, I'm with 5 kids, I feel like every day I have that
Uh,
experience where I want to step in and do something. Even just last week, our 17-year-old daughter was packing. She was going away on school camp for 8 days up to the Northern Territory at the very top of Australia, completely different climate. And she had to pack for camp. And she was having those kind of pre-camp nervousy feelings, and she was feeling very anxious and irritable, and she couldn't find the head torch she needed for camping and all these things, and she was just having she was just upset. And the obviously the parental reflex is to want to say, this is not a big deal.
yeah.
Like, you're just going on school camp. You have your list. Just look at your list. Or to say, here, let me help you pack for camp. And no, so I just had to say, this is big. You're going away for a week. You're going on up to a place you've never been before. This is the other thing, and I'm sure we'll get into it later. But with 5 kids, I know that each of my kids needs a different feeling or a different parenting strategy from me.
Mhm.
Like, that
Yeah.
child particularly, she just wants to say all of her problems. She's extremely verbal. It's like she needs to complain and whinge and blah, 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 blah. And she doesn't want me to offer any solution. She
Uh,
just wants me to listen to it
uh,
and acknowledge that what she's experiencing is hard. Whereas I have other children who will just go quiet and not need to tell me anything. And I need to kind of dig it out of
mhm.
them a little bit more. Or I have another child who will tell me everything and want to hear my advice, and we can talk through it together. So with each child is different. And obviously we as parents respond differently to each one. But that was just last week where I just knew I just had to let her get those feelings out, tell me all the things that she was worried about that were difficult for her in that moment, and then just let her go. And then she packed for camp.
Mhm.
She went on camp. She just got back last night. It all went well. And I think it's like I yeah, it's like letting her, if I had gone in to try to solve those problems or tell her it's not a big deal or whatever it was, it tells her that those feelings, that I'm afraid of her feelings,
Mhm.
that I'm worried for her, but I'm not. I think those are good things. We're all nervous before we go somewhere new. Anyway, I've waffled on. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's a great example. It had me thinking of my 12-year-old daughter, who's very much that way. Just when something big is coming up, I can see the anxiety start to spike, and To your point, yeah, it could be like, hey, I'll take care of it. Let me handle it. But that's not doing them any favors. That's putting out the problem right now. But as adults, we know life is just every day in life is something like that. And so at some point, they've got to figure it out, and better to do it when we're there with them to give
Yeah.
them that support. And maybe what I've tried to start doing with my kids is let them solve it and then ask them questions at the appropriate time to walk me through how they solved it so they can hear themselves thinking through, well, this is what I did. And then it reinforces, I'll say, oh, that's a great strategy, or hey, I'm going to use that at work sometimes. And sometimes there are little things that I'm
Yeah.
learning from them along the way. But more importantly, it's helping them kind of etch those things into who they become. And yeah, it's very hard to watch. That's the thing. When we jump in to fix our kids' pain, are we rescuing them, or are we rescuing ourselves from the pain of watching them struggle? I think it's more the latter. And I
Yeah.
guess in the moment we're stopping the pain, but to what end?
Yeah. Yeah. And you made a really important point that we're allowing them to experience these difficult emotions or difficult challenges, but within the safety of and comfort of our loving family. I mean, Ivy's 17. It's only a year before she will go out into the wide world, and she's going to need to pack her suitcase by herself, and she's going to need to experience those kind of nervous things before new places and people. And these are all very important skills to develop as a child. And we're allowing them to learn them in the comfort and safety of our family at this point.
Yeah, I think the
So,
safety is key. I think that's such
yeah,
an important, just knowing that we're there, because even if
yeah,
you don't say it out loud, and I tend to, but just they feel like, okay, well, if this gets really bad,
yeah,
my dad's there or my mom's
yeah,
there. So
yeah,
absolutely. So exhibit B is the power of quote unquote, this is hard. And I think this is going to be probably one of the more powerful ideas in this conversation. And this came from you. I read some of this in your Substack, but underlying all of this is our kids need to know that we're there for them, that we understand what they're going through, we sympathize, but that doesn't mean we have to solve it. So can you walk us through what being there for our kids without fixing it actually looks like in practice? When one of your kids comes to you upset, they've been left out or rejected or hurt, you just gave a great example about your daughter going to camp, but anything else that you can say that you might be able to share that really will drive home the concept of being comfortable, kind of sitting back, being present, but sitting back? And how have you found doing that to be challenging for you? And how do you deal with those challenges?
yeah. I mean, one thing I think of when as you were just saying that is earlier this year, my 13-year-old daughter was kind of experiencing feeling left out. Some of her friends, her close friends, now have a phone and they're texting each other, and some of them have social media where they can message each other that way, and
Mhm.
they're planning things, and she doesn't have a phone and she's feeling a bit left out because of it. And I think it's really, really normal, especially at this age of 13, 14, where they start to feel like they're the only one who doesn't have something.
Yes.
Everyone else is doing this without me. There's this feeling of isolation, loneliness, and a fear of missing out. These are all very, very normal feelings for a 13-year-old to have. And I was really trying to say it is really hard, Malo, for you to be having these feelings. And when your friends are doing stuff without inviting you, it feels really lonely and it's hard. And I was starting to kind of get the wobbles thinking, oh, like, should I be giving her a phone, or should I be calling the parents of that child and trying to arrange more social time for her? Or how do I support this kid feeling these big feelings? And we, shortly after that, there was this parent meeting for this class. And we all went in, it was all the parents of the kids in this class. And the teacher asked all the parents to go around and say 3 words to describe your child, or one sentence of something you're experiencing. And so I sat in this circle, and every single parent of these 13-year-olds went around and basically said the same thing. My child's feeling left out. My child's feeling quite self-conscious, or my child's asking for a phone. It was all these kind of very similar things. And it really made me realize I actually felt so comforted, not like, as you said, misery loves company, not in that way, but just in
Mhm.
knowing just how normal it was that she
Yeah.
was feeling this way. And that kind of helped me just see the bigger picture and to be able to support her from a place of knowing that it's normal. It's like not a thing I need to fix. It's just I just need to sit with her on this bench,
Mhm.
support her through this experience, for her to navigate it, and I don't need to
Yeah.
fix it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, again, to use another analogy, I think about that adolescence, childhood, it's different, I think, with boys and girls in some ways, but the waters get choppy and
Mm.
you can't control that. And I think, to your point, not knowing that this is something everyone's dealing with, you're not going to go home and tell your child, hey, everybody in your class, their parents said they're all feeling the same
Yeah.
thing. Child, what are they going to do with that, right?
Yeah.
They don't
No,
have,
no,
that doesn't work with adults. It's not going to work with a child. So,
exactly.
but it gives you, I think, a confidence to know, okay, this is just something that at this age, they're all dealing with.
Yeah.
And I have to show up for my child, knowing what I know about them and help them navigate it in a way that is safe, minimizes maybe the big pain, as how I always think about it, the big risks,
Yeah.
and the other stuff. Over time, the waters will kind of calm themselves. And a year later, it'll be a different storm altogether.
Exactly.
I know you have 5 kids, and you've said already, and I know this myself with 3 kids, every child is different. They respond to different things. They need different things. But I guess if you could kind of broadly across all 5 of your kids, how would you describe their response when you validate what they're feeling without solving? Do you feel like they initially want you to get involved and fix it, and then they kind of settle into that space? Or does validating what they're feeling change the dynamic?
I definitely think that validating their emotions and yeah, their hurt or their challenge is so helpful, even for us. I
Mhm.
think even
Yeah.
within my marriage, if I have a hard day or something's challenging me, and I say to my husband, "This is really hard." If he were to say to me, "Everyone experiences that," or "That's not that hard," or I would that would not be helpful, right? Like, I don't wanna hear that. I wanna hear, "Yeah, that is really hard. That sucks," you know? Like, that is what you wanna hear when you're experiencing something tough. And
Mhm.
I think for kids too, that's really ultimately the best thing we can do for them is let them know that their feelings are true and valid and what they are experiencing is hard. Yeah. I think that's like kind of the best thing you can do for them is to validate their feeling.
Have you ever had a situation with any of your kids where maybe they've wanted you to get involved and fix it, and you've had to resist that urge and kind of help them realize that it's something they need to experience themselves? Or that would be I think I'm thinking about my own experiences as a dad. If one of my kids is that deeply dealing with something, I don't know if I would have the ability. I'd like to think that I'd have the ability and the big picture foresight to kind of step back and say, no, 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 you're going to navigate this. But that's my own conditioning. So I guess, what has your experience been in situations like that, if you've experienced them at all?
I mean, I guess in many ways, I am lucky in that my kids have sort of the kind of spectrum of unhappy experiences has all been in within the sort of normal think range. So nothing has been so big, and obviously that would be really difficult to watch your child experience something really, really difficult. And I guess when we're talking about this within context, we're all talking about kind of normal experiences, right? Like
Mhm.
nothing that would, I mean, it's hard for me to even kind of go there because I haven't had that experience. None of my kids have really asked me to help fix things. In
Uh-huh.
fact, I think the thing that I've learned in my experience is that when I have tried to fix things or I have tried to give advice or I've tried to say, well, when I was your age, they don't care. It's
Yeah.
almost like I think you can almost see the look in their eye. They stop listening to you.
Mhm.
It's like if you start to say, well, when I was your age, I had this, this, and this, I think they think that is not even applicable here. Like
Yeah. How's that
you
helpful
are
to me?
old, like it was black
Right.
and white back in those days. Your
Yes.
problems don't apply to me. And I think that kind of when if we start to do that, they can see right away that we're not listening to them, right? We're really just not listening. We're talking at them. I always think also Dr. Dan Siegel, he wrote the book I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier. One of his biggest things is to connect rather than correct. So instead of trying to correct or to give your child advice or to be the problem solver you're just really wanting to connect with them, like just make them feel like you are there to listen if they want to talk, or just sit in the same room as them if they don't want to talk, or when they're ready, you are there to listen to those kind of things. Like you're not, I think when we start to kind of offer advice, some kids do want it. I think some kids do. In my experience, Most of them don't.
Yeah, I think about situations, and I think this is actually the perfect segue into the next exhibit, which we're going to call normal pain. I think part of the case that you laid out earlier is in order for our kids to grow up and be able to handle hard things, they have to be able to handle hard things as kids. And so I would ask, and maybe you haven't had these experiences and that would be a good thing, but how do you know how to distinguish between what I would say is like a normal pain and something that is maybe a little bit more dire or severe? It's one thing to be left out of a sleepover or if a bunch of kids are
Yeah.
getting together. And it's another that someone's being bullied or they're completely ostracized. And sometimes we don't have the insight into what our kids are experiencing in school. We trust that the administration and the teachers are keeping them safe. But I know that I've heard stories from other parents where, oh, there's this level of bullying. And I'm very selective in what I read because I think sometimes you go online and there are a lot of stories about how technology or social media was used to bully in a way that a child took their own lives, which obviously is incredibly, incredibly sad. And I guess that's the question that I have is how do you, and I'm sure it's different with each of your kids, it's knowing your child and being able to read them,
Yeah.
but how do you find effectiveness in being able to distinguish between, okay, I need to step back, let them work through this. I'm sitting with them on the bench, or I need to pull them off this bench because the
Yeah.
circumstances require it.
Well, I think that that really comes down to each child and your own relationship with each child. And obviously, as a parent, you know and understand this child better than anyone. And definitely for me, there would be warning signs with each of my kids. And even as I said before, I have one child who wants to come home and just blah, 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 blah. This is happening, blah, 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 blah. If that child was suddenly quiet all the
Yeah.
time and not doing that, that would be an alarm bell for me. I would think something's not going on that's within the realm of normal here. And and I think there's other things like are they socializing? Are they eating well? Are they sleeping well? Are they getting up and going to school and coming home in a relatively kind of positive state or normal state? Uh, there's so many things I think as parents that we can observe, even that nuance of like but some of your kids are talkers, some of them are not. When the talker is not talking, that's maybe a sign something's not right. Little things like that. I would say also if it was prolonged, like a longer period of time. So not just like a few days or a week of kind of feeling this feeling, but like felt like it was really ongoing, then I would
Mhm.
maybe see it as a bigger issue. I mean, I'm not the expert here. I've always tried to say that in the kind of courses that I offer. I do a lot of interviewing of experts, and I've spoken to all sorts of wonderful people who would be able to answer that question better than I can. But as a parent, that's what I would be looking for. Is just like what's outside of kind of your understanding of normal for them. We know our children.
Yeah.
We know, I think, intuitively when it's a small thing they can overcome or if it's something really debilitating for them.
Yeah, I think as you were speaking, I was thinking to my own situation, times where maybe something presented with one of my kids and I thought like, oh, it sounds like a tough moment at school. But 3, 4, 5 days later, maybe they're dwelling on it or it's recurring in their conversations or to your point about their mood. I think it's pattern recognition, not to make it inhumane or like to take the emotion out of it, but you're absolutely right. I can see with each of my kids, if I look back and they've been very fortunate not to have many big situations to navigate, but where things have risen beyond, oh, this is just a normal part of being a kid. It's always presented or manifested in a way where they start to change a little bit. And I think that's where paying attention to your kids and knowing what's normal and what's not. And then just checking in. There have been times
Yeah,
where
and the checking in.
my radar has been way off where I'm like, oh, this seems like it's a big deal. And I go to my son or my daughter expecting for them to be like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. This is my world's falling apart. And they're like, no, this is all that happened. And I'm like, okay. And I think as a parent, better to ask and to assume because then at least you can show up rather than with life being as busy and with 5 kids and 3 kids, there might be a little bit of us that's like, oh, it's not a big deal. But again, you pay attention, you see the recurring things or them acting out of the ordinary. And it's a key or a signal to check in.
Yeah, exactly.
So Courtney, the last exhibit that we have is really an idea that underscores the entire case that you're making, which is kids being able to handle hard things as adults. When I hear that, I think of resilience. And society uses resilience as the word all the time. I think it's a parenting buzzword at this point. We all want
Mm.
resilient kids. We want them to be able to bounce back. We want them to be tough in the face of adversity. And I don't think I necessarily, as a parent, really have stopped to think about what that does mean, because you can't give your child resilience. It's not a lecture, it's not a lesson plan. It's something that you have to build through repetition, right? It's almost like a scar tissue. And unfortunately, with scar tissue, you have to be hurt for the scar tissue to grow. And so it's this conundrum that I think you find yourself within as a parent. And again, we're fighting that instinct to protect them from everything. But it is that experience of navigating those hard things that gives them that resilience. And every time we remove an opportunity for them to have that experience, I actually think we're stunting their ability to become resilient. And so when you think about resilience in your own kids, what does that look like? How do you see, again, someday they're going to be up. Your daughter went to camp for 8 days. You weren't there. You don't know everything that happened. But I would imagine there's this idea as parents. I know I always say all we can do is teach them the best we can and then hope that they apply that when they get out there in the real world. And I think that applies to resilience. Courtney, before we wrap up our exhibits, what do you want any parents that are listening to understand as a parent about the relationship between their child's discomfort and their child's growth?
Yeah, I would think that I think it's good if we as parents understand that experiencing discomfort is allowing them to grow, right? We grow from discomfort. We grow from hard things. It's hard when you're a kid to experience that or to
Mhm.
understand that or to have that perspective. And I think that's where we as parents are there to guide them through that. And the way that we approach their discomfort teaches them how to experience that discomfort, right? If we're just trying to take it away or solve the problem or give them a solution or give them advice, that they kind of see that as something that is a negative thing for them to be having. Like
Mhm.
we're trying to take this negative thing away from them. I think it's good if we can allow our kids to see discomfort as an opportunity to learn and grow. And we can support our children through that and love them through that and listen to all of their anything they want to say to us, I mean, just listen to them, but we don't want to take it away. And so I think it's just, there's a way, it's tricky because as parents, you don't want to be like, this is really good for you, actually, because
Right.
they're not going to that's not helpful, right? They're thinking, oh, right, this isn't good for me. But the way that you respond to them when they're having that difficult thing is how they learn to see it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that pain and that discomfort is an opportunity to grow and to learn. And to your point, your kids don't want to hear that in the moment because you're going to lose them immediately. I think you said earlier, their eyes glaze over. The other thing is, and we haven't gotten deeply into it because it's not directly related, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. When we try to bat away negative feelings for our kids or solve something immediately, I think maybe not with every child, but with some, you're teaching them that feelings aren't okay. And
Yeah.
I've met adults who don't know how to process feelings. And I think that's one of the ideas or themes here underlying all of this, which is yes, when there's difficulty or discomfort, you're developing skills that help you handle hard things when you get older, but you're also helping them be well adjusted and understand that everything doesn't have to be okay all the time. Life can be
Yeah.
hard and you're going to make your way through it. And I think being able to appreciate that as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old is an incredible life skill that is going to allow them to be able to talk about their emotions and their feelings with their partner someday or their kids, and trying to get them to avoid feeling those negative things. All that's going to force them later on in life or potentially lead to is repressing those feelings, which that stuff comes up eventually.
Yeah, it does. And I think that that's a good point that you've said. And something also that I try to do with my own kids is show them when I'm also feeling vulnerable
Mhm.
or experiencing something challenging and hard, or I feel left out from some social thing that's happening that I didn't get invited to, or whatever it is. I think it can there there's something beneficial in that too, kind of leading by example of navigating those hard feelings and kind of coming out the other end. And you can reflect back on it too. You can be like last week I was just feeling this
Right.
way. And I think that can be helpful too, talking about your own feelings. And as you said, we're all these feelings are very human and normal. And it's helpful, I think, for kids to see that. You're not trying to like explicitly say it to them that like you want them to experience all these things, but just kind of showing them can be
Yeah, I
helpful.
personally, I talked earlier about kind of my problem solving mentality as a lawyer and as a dad. When my kids sometimes will check in with me, be like, hey, are you okay? Or I'm clearly stressed out about something, or there's just too many balls in the air. My default is to say, yeah, everything's fine. I'm okay. It's fine. But they can see on my face or in my body language that that's not true. And so I think that I'm doing them a disservice because I think it's like a bit of cognitive dissonance for them, which is like, well, wait a minute. This guy is normally pretty happy and calm. And right now he's feeling something. I asked him and he's telling me
Yeah.
everything's okay. So is he not being honest with me? And they're not having all of these thoughts. It's kind of subconscious.
Yeah.
But what I've tried to start doing is being more honest with them, right? In a way that's appropriate for their ages. But it
Yeah.
might be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm having kind of a rough day at work, or I didn't sleep great last night, or I've got a big thing that's on my mind, but it's okay. It's under control. Everything's fine. But this is part of life. And I have not always done that because I've always viewed, and I think some of this is our gender roles doing some of the heavy lifting as a man and as a dad. It's like, well, I have to be in control and the steady hand. And I've realized, again, I'm depriving my kids of the ability for me to model that for them, to say like,
Hmm.
look, life is hard. And I do say those things to them, but then when the mirror is kind of turned on me, I
Yeah.
have historically struggled being vulnerable with them. And I think it's something I'm getting better at. And I'm hoping that I continue to evolve in that way.
I think that's really beautiful. That's such beautiful parenting, and to be that kind of reflective on that. And I think it's so true. The more vulnerable that you can be to everyone in your life, right? The more empowered your people will be because of it, because they're learning that you're experiencing human hard things.
And you're proactively validating for them when they feel those moments, right? They're like,
Yeah,
oh, I've seen this before. I
I've seen
know
this. Yeah,
this person I
yeah,
respect and love and admire and look to kind of be my North Star in many ways. He or she is able to navigate this. I can do it. And those are things
totally.
those are seeds you're planting without even having those conversations. So
Exactly.
there's a lot of stress on it. Maybe not stress isn't the right word. Pressure as a parent, because every one of those moments, and usually we don't have the ability to look back and unlock it until we have some distance. But I think that's part of the beauty of parenting, which is every day you kind of show up and do the best you can.
Well, also kind of circling back to how we started about talking about teenagers. One of the things I love about teenagers is that you can reflect back on things, right? Like you can 3 days later or a week later. Whereas when you have toddlers, everything is just like in the moment. You
They're
can't be
goldfish.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, you can't be
exactly.
like, that tantrum you threw 3 days ago, like that they can't do that, right? But with teenagers, you can. And so
Yeah.
my favorite thing is just like the reflection, like talking about the thing that happened before and
Mhm.
seeing that as a real learning moment. And I think that's one of the best things about teenagers is you get to do that with them.
Yeah, cognitively, there's a lot more texture there that you can go back and draw
Exactly.
on. Completely. I had never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. So,
Yeah.
well, Courtney, listen, why don't we jump into objections? So any
Okay.
any court case, they're not scary ones, I promise. But I think if anybody is listening as a parent and has doubts, I'm hoping these objections kind of capture that and speak to it. So what I like to do is give my guests an opportunity to kind of get ahead of these things and not just pretend this is all easy and completely non-controversial. Because some parents are probably listening to this and may just fundamentally have a different perspective, which is like, no, I'm a protector. And my whole job is to get them to whatever 18 or out of the house and then the world. But I think I would say that's us doing a disservice as parents. But again, that's the beauty of parenting. Everybody has their different approach. So the first objection that I'm going to give you, Courtney, is someone might be listening and thinking to themselves, hey, Courtney, it sounds like you're telling me somewhat to kind of ignore my child's pain. My kid is suffering and you want me just to sit there. And that feels cold and impersonal. It feels neglectful. Kids need their parents to step in. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that I'm definitely not ignoring their pain by acknowledging their pain. And that I mean, if we go back to the analogy of the benches, right? Like you're sitting with them on this
Mhm.
bench. You're almost seeing it as like your own, you're in this together. So you're definitely like, it would be different if you were just sitting in your house watching your child suffer on that bench outside.
Yeah.
That I think would be detrimental to them because they would feel so alone in their suffering. And that loneliness would be, I mean, heartbreaking. And that is definitely not the type of parenting I'm advocating for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to take, and I know these are my kind of manufactured objections, but I think one thing I would add to that in response is, in my experience, when I've swooped in to try to fix something for my kids, it's really been for two reasons. One is I want to keep them safe and only feel good things. Number two is I have a laundry list of other things I need to deal with. And if I can
Mhm.
put out that little fire in 5 minutes, that's actually easier than sitting with them for an hour and working through it. Someone might be listening and saying, hey, Courtney, the world is harder than it used to be. You mentioned social media yourself earlier. Cyberbullying, people are comparing themselves to everything. My son has Snapchat, and there's a map on there, and you can see who's where. And he was showing me this one day a couple of years ago, and he was like, oh, yeah. I was like, oh, why don't you call so-and-so? And he's like, oh, he's hanging out with this boy and this boy and this boy. And I was like, how do you know that? And he's like, well, I saw it on Snapchat. And I was like, oh my God, like it immediately gave me anxiety because I'm like, we're not meant to have that level of information, right? We're kind of supposed
Mhm.
to know what's going on around us. That's where survival instincts come in. But my point in sharing that is this isn't the world that we grew up in. And so you made the point earlier, we're not going to be able to bridge that gap with our kids by saying, well, when I was growing up, I dealt with X, Y, and Z. I guess my point here is, and I'm getting there in a roundabout way, how does this approach work in the digital age? Again, I know you're not saying the kids need to toughen up, but I feel like as parents and as kids, we're all navigating a rapidly changing world. And as parents, part of our superpowers as parents is being able to know how to navigate things. And we're seeing a lot of issues or topics of first impression. So with that word salad that I just dumped in front of you, like I would love your response.
Well, in the courses that I facilitated for tweens and teens, that was always the most kind of popular or kind of engaged discussion was about teens in this digital world that's changing
Mhm.
dramatically so quickly. And because we weren't teenagers in a world like this, it's so hard for us to understand what's happening for our teenagers in this world, right? And
Yeah.
like you said, the social media presents all these things of you really are aware of what you're missing out on. You are
Mhm.
really aware of your own body image and what people think of you. I mean, teens are incredibly self-conscious as it is, and social media just amplifies that. There's I mean, it's tricky because there are all these things that are normal. We touched on them before, this feeling of missing, fear of missing out, and this feeling of isolation, and this feeling like I'm the only one without this, and this loneliness that they feel. And I think this kind of digital world can amplify those feelings very quickly in a way that we can't even understand as
Mhm.
parents. But I think that as parents, it's really helpful if we are paying attention to them, asking them questions. Obviously, I think there's an appropriate time and age for kids to have those things. Boundaries are really important in terms of social media and screen usage. From all the experts I've interviewed, balance is really important. We want to make sure that they're having a balance of like real life experiences and these experiences online, and just helping our kids like the feelings they're feeling are whether because they're in an online space or a real space are still valid feelings. So I would just say that it's about having that connection with your child, being there for your child, understanding that it's difficult. There's lots of things that are going to come up for them that are difficult, and just being there for them, and trying to help support them through it. I think one thing that's true is that all of us parents are feeling this way, right? Like this
Mhm.
is just like the reality for us all. And I think, can be helpful just to know that we're all in it together, kind of.
Definitely. And I think we all want the same thing, right? We want our kids to grow up to well-adjusted, functioning, resilient people who know how to navigate these tools because they're not going anywhere. And I think to your
Yeah.
point, I think a number of things you've said today will stick with me after we wrap. But one will be going to your child's school and having all these parents sit in a circle and essentially say 20 different versions of the same thing. Again, we all want the same thing. It's hard. It's unique to each of our kids. We have to know how to show up for them. But I think it's presence, it's awareness, it's checking in, asking questions. Whether we're talking about 1950 or 2026, I think it's the same muscles.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Courtney, the next part we're going to jump to is the closing argument. You can keep this short because I feel like sometimes I ask people to give a closing and they feel like they're just kind of restating the things they've already said. And so this can be 30 seconds, this can be 5 minutes. It's really up to you. But what I would love for you to do is speak directly to whoever's listening. I want you to imagine that someone's listening, they're a parent, they're feeling the weight of some of the struggles that you and I have talked about tonight from a parenting perspective. And maybe they're a parent who knows that they get involved too much. They helicopter parent or they over rescue. They jump in too fast. They don't want their child to be hurt. So assuming that person's listening or you're just having coffee or tea with that mom or that dad, what do you want them to remember as we wrap up today?
I guess I would just want them to remember that all these feelings that our children are having are human feelings. They're all really normal. And in order for our kids uh, to be able to navigate through the rest of their life and experience those feelings and cope well with them, we need to just help them through those feelings now when they're under kind of our roof. And yeah, and that you just like your kids, it's funny. Your kids need to feel loved by you, but they also need to feel that nothing they do can change the fact that you love them. And I always remind myself that I just loving your children, it no matter what, is like, I mean, it sounds so simple, but actually it's really just what they want. Like
Mhm.
they're going to go up and down. They're going to do bad things, good things. They're going to have sad experiences, happy experiences, good feelings, bad feelings. And your job as a parent is just to be there for them, love them, and support them through
I
it.
Something you just said reminded me. I was at a work dinner maybe now 4 years ago, and I was sitting with one of the members, one of the directors for the company that I worked for on our board of directors. And he's, I don't know, maybe 20 years older than me. And we were chatting, and he's a wonderful guy. And he's telling me just about his son and his daughter, who are now in their 20s. And my son, I think, was maybe 13 at the time. And he was asking how my kids were. I think kind of reliving as parents do when they get older, like their own raising kids through younger parents. And he was asking about my son. And I was like, yeah, he's 13 and I don't really recognize him anymore and all these things. And we had a very long conversation that I won't get all into. But the thing that he said that I think about regularly is the only thing that you need to do is make sure that he knows you love him, that it's unconditional, and
Yeah.
that you're always going to be there for him. And
Yeah.
you stand here and sometimes he'll be right here, sometimes he'll be over here, but he'll always come back. And so you talking about that, hey, just remember, you love you need your kids to know that you love them and that nothing can change that, right? That's unconditional love. And I think you hear that word or that term thrown around, but I feel like the only unconditional love that I've ever experienced in my life is with my kids. And that's not to say anything about relationships and my family, but it's like, I didn't understand it until I had my own kids. My parents used to talk about that a lot. My dad used to say, and you'd have to know my dad, but he was like, look, you could kill someone and I would still love you. And he's like, please don't kill someone. But that is the depth of how I feel. And that's just how my dad communicates. But when you were saying that, it just got me thinking about that dinner. And that's been true. Even my son at 16, I kind of stand here and I make sure he always knows that I am here and he comes back when he needs to. And I don't wrap up my love. It's not conditional on us spending a certain amount of time together or those sorts of things. And so what you
Yeah.
shared was very illuminating.
Another reminder that I give myself is just, and along these sort of same lines, is just that the relationship that you have with your child is the most important thing, right? That relationship you have is more important than correcting behavior, teaching lessons, being right, or proving a point to them, or having a boundary listened to. All of those things are going to be easier if your
Yeah.
relationship with them is strong. So that's the priority. And it's something I come back to all the time because I'll be trying to prove a point or I'll be trying to correct behavior and doing it in a way that is not conducive to the relationship. And I'll go back,
Yeah.
no, okay, the relationship is the priority here. My child needs to feel like we're solid, we're strong, I love you. And then you can do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Anyway,
foundation. No,
yeah, yeah.
that's beautiful. So the last thing, Courtney, that I like to do on episodes is give people listening what I call micro tools. So it's a couple ways to take some of the ideas and the concepts we've talked about and lets them kind of carry it out into the real world. So it's that same parent that maybe is listening who struggles to not swoop in and immediately solve the problem for their kids. If you can give our listeners maybe one tool that they can apply the next time they find themselves in a situation where they feel their child hurting, that can maybe help them kind of reset and think about it through the lens we've talked about here today.
Maybe something that would be helpful would just take a minute before you respond to your child or react and just ask yourself, what does your child need? Does your child need the advice, or what? I don't know. I think sometimes we can just respond really quickly to our children because we're busy and there's a million things going on. But sometimes what's helpful is just pausing before you say anything, and maybe what is the best thing for your child is to experience this feeling without you trying to fix it.
I think that's a great tool, Courtney. It's very similar to kind of how I mentioned earlier, how I try to think about a situation, but I'll take that. I usually pose the question to my child. And again, with my 16-year-old and 12-year-old, they're a little bit better about saying, I just need you to listen, or I need some advice. With my 7-year-old, I kind of have to read her energy and try to understand what are the stakes. And so I think to anybody listening, a way to approach this might just be to ask yourself 3 questions. And some of this is going to steal from what you just shared. But that first question is my child in danger? If they are, like, you act immediately. You get involved right out of the gate. If they're not in danger, then you kind of pause. To your point, you say, hey, does my child need me to solve this, or listen? Usually it's listen. And I think the question that I'm going to weave into my approach following our great conversation today is, what would it teach my child if I let them work through this on their own? And I think that is the driving principle of, okay, I'm depriving them of the ability to develop this tool if I get involved. And I know every parent's going to think about it differently. And at the end of a long day, if you're exhausted, or each of your 5 kids has given you 2 things that they're dealing with that day, it's hard to, but I always find that having these micro tools at your disposal helps in a moment where life is flying by and you're trying to do the right thing. And again, as parents, we're not going to always get it right, but I do think that going into situations like that, less as a problem solver and more from a place of curiosity, is a solid first step.
You're way better at answering the questions I'm supposed to answer.
No, it's what I think a little bit of it is occupational hazard. I answer questions for a living, and I do have the advantage of I'm the one who prepared these questions. Courtney, you've been great, and I really appreciate it. I know we've gone a little over on time. Before we wrap up, please let our listeners know where they can find your work, your Substack, your website, anywhere you want people to follow you. Anything you do share, I'll put in the show notes so people can click and learn more about you. But what would you like to plug before we wrap up?
Well, people can find me on Substack. I'm courtneyadamo.substack.com. I write 2 posts every week that go out into people's inboxes, and I just share honest reflections on motherhood. I'm also on Instagram at Courtney Adamo, and I've written 2 books now. One came out last year called The Family Home, and I have a new book coming out in a few months called At Home in Every Season, which is a beautiful book on rituals and activities and crafts that go season by season for
Very
families to connect with each other and connect with nature. And so I'd love for people to check that out.
Absolutely. And I'll put links to both, assuming the second one's available for pre-order. Courtney, this has been really wonderful. I wish I had this conversation with you 10 years ago. I feel like I could have maybe made some better decisions as a parent and helped my kids in ways, but I guess better late than never, as they say.
I think we both could have benefited from having this conversation 10 years ago. It's really nice chatting with you, and I think you're a really good parent.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll make sure I play this part of the episode for my kids so they can, to remind them, be like, look, other people are saying it, not me. Well, listen, for everyone listening, that is our case for today. If you are a parent and you recognized yourself in any of this, the reflex to rescue, the urge to fix, that panic when your child is hurting, we'd love to hear from you. Please post on social media with the hashtag #TheCaseFor and tell Courtney and I, what is the hardest thing that you've experienced about letting your kids feel the hard stuff themselves? And what did you learn when you finally did? Courtney, thanks for being here. Everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. And please remember, whatever your case is, don't be afraid to build it and carry it out into the real world.